All right, everybody, happy Friday or Saturday, depending on where you live. I'm Megan Kirby with Language Dynamics Group, and I want to welcome you to episode 4, the last episode of 2021 for Comprehending Comprehension, Conversations with Trina and Doug. The topic today is the science of reading comprehension instruction. So without further ado, because we always run out of time, I'm going to go ahead and kick it to Trina and Doug to introduce themselves. I'll be available in the chat, and I will also post a link to the article that will also be discussed.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Exactly. Thank you, Megan.
We did just what we said we were not going to do, right? Which was talk at the same time. Yeah, all right, Doug, I'm cueing you. Go for it.
Okay. So, well, thank you for joining us for the 4th episode of Comprehending Comprehension. We are super excited to have you guys with us. I can't believe that you're willing to dedicate an hour to chatting with us. Hopefully you'll engage with this conversation. So this is, again, a live audience interactive conversation. So please, we encourage you to communicate with us and share your thoughts with us so we can have a real conversation with real people.
So this conversation is actually for anyone interested in comprehension. You know, Doug and I are researchers, but we were also clinicians. He was a speech language pathologist. I was a school psychologist, behavior analyst, special ed teacher, gen ed teacher, preschool teacher. I have tons of hats. But anyway, we also want other people to engage this conversation with us. So we're expecting reading specialists, speech language pathologists, behavior analysts, and even parents. Maybe you do not teach reading as a job. That's great. We want you here because these are the conversations that we need to have, interdisciplinary kind of conversations. Doug and I will ask a few questions about our topic and then just let the conversation evolve. You can turn on your cameras if you want to, but please note that we do record so that we can share this content with others. So it is video recorded and audio recorded. You can put questions and comments in the chat, raise your hand, your Zoom hand if you want to, or you can just talk. We're okay if you kind of like fight out me and Doug talking, right? Part of the reason why we do this is because we love to discuss these things. So you gotta engage with this, otherwise we're just gonna like steamroll you, okay?
All right, a couple of disclaimers. Trina and I, or disclosures or disclaimers. Trina and I are connected with Language Dynamics Group, which is hosting Comprehending Comprehension. And it's a very tight family. When you hear the Johnson & Johnson, a family company, well, Language Dynamics Group is definitely a family company that is connected to Trina, Spencer, and I.
Yes. Through our research, we've developed a number of intervention and assessment tools, and they're disseminated through Language Dynamics Group. We do not necessarily discuss our products specifically, but sometimes they come up because people know that that's what we do. Also, let me introduce Doug. He's a professor at Brigham Young University in the Department of Communication Disorders.
Oh, that's
Doug,
it.
you need to introduce me.
How come your byline is longer than mine? Trina Spencer is a professor at the University of South Florida in the Department of Child and Family Studies and is an affiliate faculty in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders. And I am a commercial fisherman. We need to add that to my byline so it's as long as yours.
Really? Do you think size matters?
Oh, well, no comment.
That's probably wise. Okay, I have one thing before we start off with our questions. This is the first time we've chosen an article to talk about, and let me tell you why. Most of the time we have a number of articles or like a topic that we've kind of just like chosen, but the reason why we chose an article this time is because I recently used this article in my undergraduate research class. And there's like 7 undergrads from very diverse disciplines, and they engaged this article so admirably. I was so impressed with them. They rocked it. And I loved the conversation so much. I was like, this is the conversation we should be having in Comprehending Comprehension. So that's what we're doing. It's okay if you have not read this article. If you have, great, you can draw from it. But if not, we've got some questions that are going to draw some of your own input. Okay.
And this
Right.
article, the first author is Nell Duke, and then it was also written by Alessandra Ward and David Pearson. And Nell Duke is very well known in the reading world. And I told Trina when I first was hearing about Nell Duke and everybody was heaping praises on Nell Duke, I was a little bit like, what does Nell really know about language? What does she know about comprehension? This article took all of my doubts away. And I really love reading this. It's fabulous. And I think that we should have her on someday. Trina thinks maybe she's too famous for us to get her on
We
here.
can't afford her. I mean, and Dave Pearson, I don't know if you guys know him. He's an old dude, man.
Really?
Like he's been around a long time. So yeah.
He probably doesn't appreciate that, but he is one of the most well-known researchers in.
Old was synonymous with experience and expertise, really.
Got it. So okay, so let's do this. You've got a couple questions, Trina, to start us out.
All right. Well, one of the big concepts that these authors talk about in this paper and in their theory of like science of reading, they talk about bridging skills. Okay, I want to know, does anybody know what bridging skills are and why are they important? So let's start there. Bridging skills. Has anybody heard that term before?
No.
Maybe not.
No, I certainly heard it. And I think the bridge is between word recognition and comprehension. That's what I would.
Okay.
Yeah. Love it.
Right. So like, I think they're making this point that much of the science of reading and like the simple view of reading, right? The simple view of reading from Goff and Tumner really separates word reading and listening comprehension. But they're trying to make the point that there are skills that are common in both of those things, and they call them bridging skills. Yeah, Doug, do you remember what those bridging skills are?
Yeah, check it out. I love this. I love this. This sentence right here is phenomenal. The graphophonological semantic cognitive flexibility would be one of those. I'm like, wow, okay, that's $1 million word right there. That is one of them. But as Nell says, it's a very simple concept. It is essentially you dividing your attention between identifying the sounds that particular letters make and also attending to the meaning of the words simultaneously, really, while you're reading. I don't know if I butchered that definition, but that's my takeaway from GSF, essentially.
So yeah, they also say that the simple way of describing that is executive functioning skills. It's like, just being able to pay attention to all of those things, and the control of what's going on in the reading oscillates back and forth between the graphophonological pieces and the semantic pieces, which makes reading a very complex task.
Yeah, another one is morphological awareness. And when we've been having discussions about how to teach morphological awareness and how to test it, and what category does it fall under? Does it fall under the decoding bin, or does it fall into the comprehension bin? And that is a tricky one, because I think it actually is a bridging piece. It can be used for both. You use morphological awareness to both help you decode words and to also understand the meaning of those words.
Yeah, I'm just curious if any of you who are on this group, if you guys actively teach morphological awareness, and if so, I'd like to hear like how you're doing that. Anybody? Come on. This
Joyce.
is a conversation.
Joyce, jump in, Joyce.
So I teach it, and actually, let me get something to show you. There's out of Australia. I don't know if anybody knows Bill Hansberry. Anybody? So I actually hosted a webinar, and he presented his and his partner, Sally Andrews. They have this, I think, a fantastic gimmick for morphology. Hold on one second.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah.
While Joyce is looking for that, there's a couple comments in the chat here. Active view of reading coming from Laura. The active view of reading is something that Nell Duke has just thrown out there for everybody to chew on. And there was a very interesting response also though from Goff. I don't know if Tunmer was part of that response to the active view of reading. Someday we'll get into that. There's a controversy. There's a controversy that's emerging here, and I like it. I like it a lot.
Oh, look at this. We're going to get visual aids from Joyce. I love it.
Okay.
Oh,
So,
look at that.
so the gimmick is a firecracker, and they call their system the word cracker. But, and I don't have, it comes with magnets with all the lots of suffixes and prefixes, certainly not all en roots. And it's interactive for the kid. The kid can write on this board. And I have found it engaging, and the kids just pick it up so easily. And they have 4 rules that they use for adding suffixes. So if you can see, it's add, double, drop, or change, or keep.
I love it.
Oh my God. I love it too. And it's the kids who never thought about word parts, you know, even I haven't done stuff. My kids are young that I work with, so I haven't done many root words, but I've done base words. And once you teach them to look at a word for a prefix, a suffix, and what's the base word, it really opens up a new pathway for them.
That's great. Joyce, thanks so much for sharing that. You know, really the reason why I wanted to ask that question is that there are many people who struggle to teach morphological awareness, or it's done only in like spelling or something like that. And so that's really great. But as they describe it as a bridging skill, it works for both meaning and for code. So awesome. Okay, and the third of the bridging skills is reading fluency. Ooh, Doug, do I ask you, what do you think about that?
Okay, this is what I think. I think that the way that reading fluency has been bastardized in our system with just focusing on, sorry about the word there, but I mean it in the right way, with just a focus on speed and accuracy is not a bridging skill. I think that it is independent. I think that when you really, though, are talking about reading fluency, oh, you mean when you talk about prosody as well, then absolutely it's a bridging skill. That's my very obnoxious take on it.
It was obnoxious.
Thank you.
But these authors do make a point that it's, you know, accuracy, rate, and prosody, right? So they do say that. So that's good. And does anybody else have any thoughts about reading fluency?
I think it's interesting that many children who are dyslexic have almost no reading fluency, not all, but that's one characteristic of dyslexics. And I will have someone butcher a book and then they can tell me not only everything about the story, but words they got incorrect, that they didn't read correctly, they will use in their retell. So it's not, I think each individual is unique. I also have a couple of kids who can read beautifully and they have no idea what's going on in the story.
Okay, so Joanne, I was going to ask this question, but this quote goes right into there. So my question is really this: what are your thoughts about this statement? Reading comprehension is not automatic, even when fluency is strong.
Oh. Bingo.
Yeah, that's what you were saying, right? Even though there are so many people, especially in the school psychology realm, everybody thinks like, no, we just need to build their reading fluency and then they'll comprehend. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. There's not a guarantee of that. So,
Sorry, I think we discussed that the last time about, and when I said I see a difference between language comprehension and reading comprehension, and Doug, you said think of it all as language comprehension. I think we discussed this very point. We have those word callers, those kids who can read beautifully, but don't understand, just like Joanne just said.
And this is the example, one of the examples that Hoover and Tunmer brought up in their response to the active view of reading, because they said that if you can do decoding independent of comprehension, then that demonstrates that there is independence. So the active view of reading really starts to mush things together and focuses a lot on the bridging skills. But I did think that Hoover and Tumner had a great point. Like, you can literally independently decode something and not understand a single word that you decoded. So there is independence there in those constructs, or there can be independence in the constructs. That's an important thing to recognize.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Any other thoughts before, let's see, we ask another couple questions. So one of the reasons why I like where Nell Duke comes from. Now, everything that she says, I'm not sure I agree with, but I'm not necessarily the expert you should be listening to. Nell Duke makes a lot more money than me, so listen to her. But one of the things I really, really like about her position is that she's very careful to not talk about things as either or, right? And there's a lot of podcasts, articles, conversations, books that seem to be do this, not this. Like, don't teach strategies, build knowledge. Don't focus on comprehension, focus on word reading. It seems like this either or thinking. And every time I hear Nell Duke talk about these topics or anything she's writing, she's very explicit to say, we don't need to do that, that there's synergy between these things, like strategies and building knowledge and comprehension and word reading. Okay. But I'm curious though, why you think there is, why is Nell and her collaborators kind of unique in this? Why is there so much either or thinking?
The reading wars.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us more, Joanne, more about that. Like, what about the reading wars makes it kind of like us against them kind of thing?
Well, you have the science of reading, things that are evidence-based and research-based. And then you have, I don't want to brush with a broad stroke, but then you have other models like Lucy Calkins and things, that are used very, very far and wide. They're used a lot in schools, and there's really no efficacy. There's nothing that shows that that program is making a difference, but people are clinging to it. And even within my own district, I'm probably the only science of reading literacy specialist. Everyone else kind of drank the other Kool-Aid. So it's tricky. It is kind of a war, because I really believe that I'm doing the best thing for kids. And so if you're passionate about it, it's hard to let it go. But I like the idea of taking what you can from each part and making it work. So it's nice to see not the either or, to say, okay, well, we can use that. Well, how can that inform my instruction? Or so that is good to hear.
Yeah, it is. So I was thinking, just using the word war, right, suggests you have to have an opponent. You're working against something, right? So I think the science of reading is kind of a rebranding of the reading wars to try to bring us away from being dichotomous, that either or thinking. However, there's still a problem within the science of reading realm, because what we're seeing in the science of reading is that people are saying, no, we shouldn't be teaching strategies. And then the next person says, yeah, but strategies are the only thing that works, right? And so we've got and honestly, there is some research, and let me just summarize that a little bit, that and they talk about it in this article, is that reading comprehension strategies has quite a good research base, but it has limitations, right? If it's done in isolation of things like building knowledge, then it's less effective. And then there's a recent meta-analysis that I just read last week when I was visiting Doug, or was that 2 weeks ago when I was out in Utah?
Mhm.
Yeah. Anyway, I read this article that both reading comprehension strategies improve reading comprehension, like as instruction, and building knowledge instruction builds reading comprehension, but actually they work better together, right? But yet so much of it has been like, no, do this, do that, even within the science of reading. I don't know if that's been the experience with anyone else.
I wanted to back us up just a second here, and the either or also applies to whether you have a focus on phonics and explicit phonics instruction first, and then you focus on comprehension. There tends to be this view, even within some science of reading or people who claim to adhere to the science of reading, they tend to think, or some of them think, that you should focus on phonics first and then build comprehension. And I appreciate that Nell brings up the point that the research supports a simultaneous focus on both of those. Now we're not talking about a simultaneous focus on, I don't know, balanced literacy and explicit systematic phonics. That's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about, though, that you can't do both at the same time, both focuses of the simple view of reading at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, did I have that one? Does anybody have a question? This is a good time. If you guys have a question, you can ask us or the group.
I don't necessarily have a question, but like to comment on that as well. I think if you're not doing both, it's an inequity, right? We need to do both. And there are different parts of the day when we focus on different areas. And even if you're in kindergarten, you need to be exposed to complex text and vocabulary and background knowledge.
Oh, that was beautiful.
I love
Antoine, is that how you say your name?
Tony.
Oh,
Tony.
Tony, that's much easier for me.
Tony, it's so good. It is discriminatory, absolutely, to only focus on phonics. And what that does is it leaves children who have weaker language skills behind, or even just children who have different dialects opposed to what the school district or the school is expecting of the children. It's not fair to them. So you're absolutely right. It needs to be, you need to have a focus on both.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you can keep it separate. Sorry, you can keep it separate. That's important. I think where things went wrong with balanced literacies, they started to merge them together, right? You get the 3 cueing system embedded into phonics, and that's just messing everything up.
You see me like wanting to like spew right now because that was like a trigger point, right? Oh man, so much. Like I love language and I love word recognition, right? The problem with balanced literacy is they're using language to decode or recognize the words, that's not the, oral language, meaning vocabulary and linguistic complexity, but rather than using the grapheme phoneme relations to decode the words, like as what you need in explicit phonics, they're using language to help you guess. That's not the accurate way to merge and synergize these things, right? You need to have explicit phonics for the word recognition and the oral language for the meaning pieces of it. And you can merge those things beautifully. And that's what the science of reading would tell us to do. And I have a great story. My first grade son, he could read in first grade, he could read 40 words a minute. And then his teacher taught him the 3 cueing system and it went down to 10 words a minute. And it was so terrible, so terrible. And I had to have these meetings with her and I got called that mom that like the principal has to escort to the meeting. And she's like, this is how we teach, reading. And I said, yeah, but those are not appropriate strategies for word recognition. Those are comprehension strategies, not word recognition. And she could not understand it, could not. It was so challenging to watch your kid get taught horrible, horrible habits.
Can we understand the other side for a minute? What did she not understand about that? I need to understand.
She didn't understand that reading had 2 separate components.
That's what it is, right? It's just not understanding the simple view of reading. And I know we talked about Alan Kami in the past here with his narrow view of reading, but it even highlights that even more, right? Like he is literally trying to separate them to a strong degree. Like reading is only decoding. And guess what comprehension is? It's language. We don't need another name for it. It's not reading, it's comprehension. Now Nell's doing the opposite, right? with her, what's she call it? The complex? No, not complex. What's the word?
Comprehension?
No. Her model that she just proposed. Oh goodness. What's it called, guys? The
Active.
active
Oh, the active.
active view. Thank you. But either way, it's still recognizing though that reading really is comprised of these two constructs of. And so that's it, huh? That's the issue. That's the problem. People who love balanced literacy, they don't get the distinction of decoding and comprehension.
I just want to share this really quickly. I started doing the Science of Reading book club, and they had Shifting the Balance, and the authors were both on there, and they were balanced literacy trainers, and maybe all of you know the story, but I thought it was really interesting how they merged the worldviews together and how they took the parts that were good from the other and merged it into, and I felt like it made a nice balance. Not that that's the best word to use, but I thought it was really helpful. It kind of merged into the arena of Science of Reading and looking at some of the value of the past.
That's great. I think that's important to do, because too often when we try to bring something in new, we completely de-implement everything that was old, and we don't always need to do that. Evelyn has her hand raised though, because I want to get to hear her comment.
Hi, Trina. First of all, I want to thank you, Trina, because you have been very helpful just in the background and sharing some support for me at my school. And it was very, very good advice. But part of that advice I incorporated, and I've just been learning as I'm talking to other SLPs in different districts, that this terminology, balanced literacy and science of reading, is extremely charged. And people have their identities, their teaching identities tied to it. So you have to be really careful to what terminology you use. And the advice I've heard from other SLPs who have interest in reading and through their own some challenging experiences they've had with teachers is to avoid the term balanced literacy when you're talking to teachers who are interested in science of reading and language-based strategies, to use the term typical literacy practices in schools or typical literacy instruction instead of balanced literacy. And instead of using science of reading, talking about structured literacy practice and diving into the area of language-based, which is what SLPs, that's kind of our scope of practice. And then you don't cross over to areas that have been traditionally reading specialists territory. I mean, language shows up in word recognition for phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. That's language-based skills. And it's also in language comprehension. So we kind of straddle both ends. And if we talk about it from that lens, what I'm learning is it's a lot easier to kind of get in there. But when you're an SLP working in a school district, it is very charged and you're kind of walking landmines and you want to build collaborative relationships. So there's a lot of relationship building and trust before you can get to that point of been diving into all the nuances of this huge body of work. So yeah.
Thanks, Evelyn. I think those are really good reminders. I know that when I'm talking to clinicians or practitioners or educators, I usually ask for definitions. Well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by this? Because you can't always tell what they're talking about when you say science of reading or even balanced literacy. Those are just, political labels to things, So I think that's a really great point. I love it. I love
Evelyn, can I add to that? I really think this is a beautiful way to build a relationship with someone else and not put them on the defensive, which Trina tells me that I am good at doing. I apologize.
Well, I am one of the few people who like that about you, Doug.
Oh, okay. Well, but my thing is like, Evelyn, if you say like traditional approaches and then you say versus structured literacy, when you say structured literacy, maybe I'm wrong, but my mind goes to, oh, you're talking about systematic phonics, explicit systematic phonics instruction, right? And so when you say there's structured literacy or there's traditional approaches, I feel like the structured literacy is like part of the science of reading, but then there's the science of language as well, which I know you were acknowledging, but like
totally, yeah. So the science, I actually like the term by, I think it's Pamela Snow, the SOLAR term, science of language and reading.
Mhm.
However, and this is coming from another school district in the Lower Mainland, where the SLP team went full steam ahead and did presentations using the terms science of reading and balanced literacy in their PowerPoint presentation. And unfortunately, that really rubbed the wrong way. So they were directed by their team to eliminate those terms and use typical, the agreed upon term was typical literacy practices. I actually wrote that down, typical literacy practices and structured literacy, but then they immediately go into the SOLAR, science of language and reading, because I agree with you, that's what comes to mind too. When I'm thinking of explicit, structured, systematic, phonics, phonemic. Yes.
If you guys have been around long enough, right, the terms are going to evolve. As soon as they get too politically charged, or they have, like paired associations with certain things, we need a new term, right? It's just going to happen, right? That's why I'm constantly saying, what do you mean by that? What are we doing? It's
Hey,
good.
so Trina and Joyce and Tony and actually everybody, there's these comments about how a lot of teachers don't understand this, that we need to start with pre-service programs. Is it true then that the majority of the programs out there are focused on this balanced literacy or whole language kind of approach? And why, can someone help me understand why that is the case when we're talking about a research institution that focuses on research? Like how did that ever happen? And why have these programs not evolved with the research?
I have my theories about it. And I was the biggest balanced literacy person for 17 years. I hung out every summer for 8 summers with Lucy Calkins at Teachers College, right? And was I getting children to read? Yes. Children were growing, except for that small portion, right? And didn't that woman just get in trouble on social media who worked for Francis and Pinnell?
Yeah.
Who said,
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
but we're only talking 20% of kids.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're talking 20% of kids. So if you look at Lucy's program, it's got a good look to it, right? If you go on Heinemann and you look at their professional development materials, they're colorful, right? We like that. We like pictures. You look at the science of reading stuff that's out there, and it's very dry, right? There's no cutesy thing to it. And I think as an elementary teacher, we like cutesy. And we are seeing growth.
This is why Story Champs. This is why people buy Story Champs, is because it's colorful and cute, right? I sure hope it's because it's effective too.
Right. Yeah, hopefully it's not just all because of Olivia's graphic design work.
I know. It has nothing to do with you and me. It has to do with it look good. But she's right.
Yeah.
Tony's right. And I forgot, I was going to make another comment earlier when she said that about equity. So that comment that the Lucy Calkins or Fontes and Pinnell person said about it's just a small portion, that would be true if we're talking about decoding problems or like word recognition problems, but it is not true when we're talking about comprehension problems. And one of the articles that I like to talk about brings up this issue of equity. So this study in 2012 by Kiefer and Volkovic, I think that's how you say the name, they looked at children who were culturally, linguistically diverse and low economic status. Out of all those kids who had reading comprehension problems, they were talking about specifically reading comprehension problems, and they traced back to see if their problems were language comprehension or decoding problems or both. 80% of those children were language comprehension only problems, right? Only. And then the other 20% had language and decoding problems. So what we're really after here is that the equity issues are massive when we're talking about reading comprehension. When we're talking about decoding only, they are less like racially and socioeconomically divided, right? But or disparate, I guess, for those particular kids. And that to me is why we need to be emphasizing the focus on language comprehension, not to the absence of decoding, because obviously that's necessary, it's just not sufficient, right? But there's too many kids who are being left behind, and they tend to be the Black, brown, and poor kids.
Hence this forum, Comprehending Comprehension, right? You will see people make the case. They'll say, look at the 60% of students not reading at grade level on the National Assessment of Education Progress. We need to focus on reading, and their minds go to decoding. And so, and a lot of these people, including our friends who talk about the science of reading all the time, they think that having this systematic, explicit focus on phonics will solve the reading crisis in this country. And they are wrong, wrong, wrong. There is a reason why you have 80% of Latino and African-American and Native American children who are not meeting grade level expectations in this country. And it is not solely due to a phonics factor. I can say that with absolute confidence. In fact, like you said, Trina, the majority of the children probably have more of a language related factor involved.
Mm-hmm. And think about it, if the low, the culturally and linguistically diverse group of students or low SES have language difficulties, like 80%, all of them, 100% of them had language comprehension problems, it's likely affecting their word recognition. Right. So if we're not addressing it well, we're actually holding them back from becoming fluent decoders too. So, okay, I'm ready to make a transition because I have a favorite quote in this particular article I want to share with everyone. And then let's talk about that. Okay. Is everyone okay with that? Yeah. All right. Here's my quote. It's about when comprehension instruction should begin, but after that, Doug already hit that point, but after that piece says young learners in preschool and early elementary school benefit from efforts to develop oral language comprehension, including efforts to develop oral comprehension of written language. Okay. So in parentheses, they use IE through read alouds. So my question is reading books aloud to children, is that the only way that we can develop oral language comprehension of written material? Or are there other options? I'm sure some of you do other things, but go ahead, Joyce.
I was just going to say, you have good conversations with the kids.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So like pre-K to third grade or fifth grade.
Well, if someone's really struggling, visualizing and verbalizing is something I've used. So there are other things other than read alouds.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm sort of thinking with like Dr. Goldie Mohammed when she does her 5 pursuits and talks about almost creating text sets and what's included in a text set beside a literal text. So are there visuals? Are there videos? Are there pictures? Is there conversation? Things like that.
Okay, so that's good. All right.
In first grade, when we're checking that they can recognize words, we will give them a sentence and they have to draw a picture to match the sentence.
Okay, that's good. Very good.
And in books, you can do that when you're reading aloud. Not only are you reading the text and discussing it, but you can say, do the pictures match the text?
Yeah. Yeah. I've done something like that with young kids who are emerging speakers, emerging comprehenders. And Evelyn put in the chat, like audiobooks, adding captions, which is like those text features, which is what Tony was talking about, like text features like captions or like graphics that support the text. That's great. I also like videos, YouTube and TV. Okay, so we could talk about all those things and they could be exposed to complex language through some of those venues.
Like
Doug?
right now, when your students are meeting with you via Zoom and turning on the closed captioning, I mean, they read those constantly and they learn, oh, I didn't know that was spelled that way. I mean, it's a constant thing that they're learning from.
Yeah, that's great. That's a smart idea. Very good. Okay, so Doug, do you want to answer the question?
Well,
What would we say the good options are?
Well, I think all of these responses are fabulous and they all will build language, but I don't think that they are really sufficient or not powerful enough to move the needle. We've been doing shared storybook reading for a long time, and you can tell that that's sort of like the default activity. This is what Nell knows. This is what she goes to. It's shared storybook reading. It's pretty passive. It's true that the children will talk about a vocabulary word, or the teacher will bring up that sort of thing related to the vocab, but it is unusual to actually ask the children to tell the passage themselves, to retell, to produce that kind of language, and not in just like a response approach, like an ellipsis, but literally telling the story and using that complex language. That seems to be maybe let me say an active ingredient, but probably the most powerful active ingredient, even for learning a language. You can sit and listen to someone communicate for a long time, but until you actually start to produce the language yourself, you're not really going to pick it up. And we are talking about learning a dialect, learning academic language. Now, is that what you were going for, Trina, or did I take us off a path you weren't looking for?
No, I thought that was good. I would probably make it a little bit more concise and say like retelling, right, is a really powerful way, because in storybook reading, you're just listening, like Doug was saying, is passive. But if you listen and express, you've got both of those together. It's much more complex and you get the input and the output practice. So retelling is the primary active ingredient in our interventions. And I would use retelling in absolutely everything. In the 2021 systematic review that I read 2 weeks ago at Doug's house, they put retelling as under the comprehension strategy instruction. Okay. And this article that we're talking about really puts it under text structure, right? So like the way we do it in Story Champs, we combine retelling and text structure, like looking at the narrative elements and expository text structure elements. But if it's exposition, we also combine it with background knowledge or content knowledge, which is what both of these authors or sets of all authors are talking about. It seems to work better if you're doing things like retelling and you're retelling content. Okay. And we can teach complex written language through an oral language modality using narratives and short, small paragraphs that are designed or carefully constructed for children to be able to retell. And in that way, it becomes far more powerful than just listening to a book by itself.
And what it does also is it develops that expressive piece, which does transfer to writing. So like I work with a lot of amazing students here at BYU, and they understand a lot of complex language when they read it and when I'm talking with them. And I sit down though with them and we do a thesis. For them, it's much more difficult to write in that very same complex language that they can read and understand with facility, with no difficulty. You ask them to write it, it's very hard because they have not been asked all throughout their childhood to produce that complex language. They've only just been exposed to it in a passive way. And so if you can talk like a book, then you can write like a book. But if you can only just read a book and not talk like that book, then your writing will suffer. And you see that across the board, not to diminish any of my students here. They're phenomenal, but that's a skill we develop over 2 years when we're writing a thesis with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what about retelling? How much have you used in your instruction and in your work, like would Nell benefit from adding more explicit conversation around retelling, or at least put on the EG read alouds and retelling, you know, something like that? What experience do you have with retelling?
Well, getting ready to have students leave for break, and even like this Thanksgiving break, there's many parents that will say, what can I do to help my children at home? And that's one of the major things. You don't need any materials or anything like that. Just tell me about what happened. What do you think happened? Can you put that into your own words? What do you think was the problem? What do you think? I mean, just talking to them and having them retell their experiences, the television show, any of those things.
Yeah, that's excellent. We would be in 100% agreement with you, because the nice thing about retelling, and I'm now going to switch over and mention Megan. Okay, because Megan and I do research together, and one of the reasons why we like to do oral retelling and oral storytelling is because it doesn't require any materials. Your media is their own experiences, right? And so you can tell stories in the car, you can tell stories in the bathtub, you can tell stories, you know, like hanging out in the lunchroom with your friends, you know, and so it goes with them everywhere. And because you don't need like materials and resources, you can, it's much more scalable, right? And it gives children something to be practicing even when the teacher or the SLP is not with them. Okay. Yeah. Megan, do you want to add? Not you, Doug. Megan.
Well, I was going to say, if our role is also to reduce systematic barriers, right? Like break down structural racism issues, this is it. Like we need to start thinking about scalability of our instruction and making it accessible. And the cost is a huge factor. So I think that that's something and it's also universal. We could also practice it ourselves and get better personally, especially around the holidays, and engaging children, maybe bring out the photo books, the photo albums. It's Instagram these days that most parents have photo albums, or it's Instagram. But if we think about engaging intergenerational families, they don't have Instagram, some of these older generations. And so I think that that's also something that we can engage children in, and that it affects then reading comprehension and writing. So it's like more bang for your buck.
And before literacy was developed, I mean, the written language, right? We had oral storytelling. So embrace that, and many of our low-income families are not going to read books to their kids, but they would absolutely tell bedtime stories.
I did a study with Tina Sturgeon in Wyoming, and just very quickly, what we did was, I think I've already probably talked about this, but we split the children into 3 different groups. One group got story champs with all the pictures and the icons and the retelling. The other group got just retelling. That's all they did. And then the other group was just business as usual. And when we looked at the outcomes of this study after a few weeks, the children who just did the retelling and the children who did story champs had the same outcomes, and far greater outcomes than the children in the control group. And of course, there were behavior issues with the children who were just retelling. They did not enjoy just retelling and not having all the pictures and icons, but it was clear that the active ingredient was retelling. Just like you were saying, Megan, that can happen anywhere. You don't have to have Olivia's beautiful designs. Sorry, I love Olivia, of course, but that's not.
The artist is his wife, Olivia. I just want y'all to know his bias there, but they are great. And it's actually me who got her to design those things, not him.
Well, because, hey, I'm with Megan. It's so helpful, though. It is a wonderful scaffold to have pictures, and you need those. A lot of children need those, right? Those pictures and those icons. But notice how we follow that effective teaching cycle in every session, and we would draw those at the end of every intervention session in Story Champs.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, Joyce.
So I'm not familiar with Story Champs, but this is the organization that you work for. Is that it?
Wow, boy, that's putting it a certain way.
I'm on it.
So did you develop it yourselves? Is this like your program?
Yeah. So we mentioned in our disclosures that we've developed intervention and assessment tools. And honestly, comprehension has always been our goal. So Doug and I have been doing research for about 15 years, and my dissertation, the first study of Story Champs, which is our intervention, was my dissertation in 2008, I guess. And Story Champs is it captures or takes advantages of this retelling abilities of children. It's highly motivating, it's socially appropriate, it's academically relevant, that kind of thing. And that's the core of that's the active ingredient of our intervention. And then we have illustrations and carefully structured stories that have complex academic language so that they're exposed to content, right? And actually in this article, they talk about syntactic complexity and conceptual density. So we write our stories so they have syntactic complexity and conceptual density plus the text structure. And then when you retell it, they not only comprehend, but also express it. So it's Story Champs. That's the name of the intervention. Okay.
So may I ask, what are your top 2 interventions like to help kids who can't organize their retell or can't even more than 2 pieces? So does it?
Yes, it does that. So that's exactly what it does, Joyce. And I would give you some others, but honestly, that's why we developed Story Champs, is to do just that. It helps them organize, it gives them a schema, and then you could have lots of then when there's a new story, new words, they can map it into that schema that they learned through Story Champs. So, and Megan has been putting in some references there. Language Dynamics Group is the company that publishes it. And we're not trying to sell you Story Champs, but honestly, that's the reason why we developed it, is because comprehension really matters and it's being neglected in the schools,
Yeah, and to be clear, of course, that is our line of research. It got turned into something because school districts needed more than just a bunch of PDFs that we were sending them. And so that's why it evolved, and that's why it includes my brother, who's the CEO, and my wife, who's the graphic designer, and Megan, who's treated. So anyways, yeah. I'm wondering if we could talk about comprehension just real fast. This is a new word that Nell Duke et al. Have coined. I think they've coined it in this paper. I don't think it was used elsewhere. Okay, so comprehension is a combination of the words comprehension and action. It's a compound word, and it has to do with constructing meaning when you're reading. And it's related to the idea that you are reading for a particular purpose. And you've got a purpose in mind, and you're making action, you're actively engaged in comprehending for a purpose. Okay. So I thought this is a pretty good idea. When I was reading this paragraph, I thought, okay, this makes sense to me. And I cannot find for the life of me Tim Shanahan's blog on this, but he talked about reading for purpose and talking about the different purposes for reading. And he was actually very critical of this because he said, to me, the purpose of reading is to understand. And that's it, period. Not to gloss over something, not to read something in depth, but to literally just understand it. And I'm not really giving him probably the credit that he is due. I cannot find his quote, but he was pushing against this concept. And I'm just curious about what you all think about this idea of how much should we include reading for a purpose in our instruction? Or is that just like something that we gloss over and say, yeah, your purpose is to understand it? Thoughts
a lot of
that?
people were angry about that he left off the purpose for enjoyment. And I think the people that have been lovers of reading forever were a little miffed by that. But you do have to give Shanahan mad props. So
that's good to know, though. So Alicia, what I'm talking about, this blog that he was talking about. Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of my media specialist friends were anti because of it, because of the loving of reading. But I mean, I understood what he was saying, but I think he just kind of left off that whole side. So yeah, it was not well received by everyone.
Hmm. Interesting.
I think Tim Shanahan either does that on purpose or he has a history of doing that, of like saying things that are a little controversial, you know,
Provocative.
Yeah, very provocative. Because the one that Doug and I actually got involved in was he had a position of comprehension strategies that like nothing else works to improve comprehension. And I was like, what? we had some back and forth about that. And his point really was that that's where the research is. It doesn't mean that other things weren't effective. It's just not other strategies didn't have an evidence base that was as strong as the comprehension strategies instruction.
So when you're reading something, and let's say you pick up a book and you want to read it and you're reading it for pleasure, the only way you derive pleasure though from that book is by understanding it. And so wouldn't it just be fair to say that really the purpose of you reading that is to understand it, and then because it's well written, you derive pleasure from that? I'm just pushing, Alicia. I don't know. I'm just wondering.
What about you've read it and you understand it and you read it again?
Okay. So so you're saying there's a purpose to you reading it again because
you already understand it, but why are you reading it again?
Yeah. You may not gain any greater understanding on that second read, but
well, you might
pleasure.
And you usually do.
And we certainly say, you know, like students, their readability and the rereads that they gain more knowledge, but that's where it really becomes like, why has my daughter listened to the Gregor the Oberlander series so many times? Because she absolutely loves it.
Yeah. Okay. Good point.
I think that's great. You know what I love about reading is there's so much to learn, and we can have debates about it, right? We can have conversations about these things, and depending on what we're reading about reading, our knowledge and our background knowledge grows. It's good. Yeah. All right. Does anybody have any other questions that they really want to talk about in this article or unrelated to this article?
Katie's been planting these beautiful little comments in here, and I love it. I just appreciate all of these things. Katie, next time we need to hear your beautiful voice too, though. You don't have to just write these things in because they're great. just saying. And your last one about kids who read fluently and competently but that don't enjoy it, I think that it means that they're not enjoying the content, right? If they understand it, then that content doesn't speak to them.
It's so funny. Alicia says that it makes me so sad. Well, guess what? I have got my kids are these kids. They are exceptional readers. They can score really high on all these reading tests, but they do not enjoy it. And honestly, I was the same way until I was an adult. I didn't enjoy reading until I was like motivated. And actually, my last question was, what role does motivation play in reading, and how do we influence it? Because I've got kids who are not motivated to read, even though they can read really, really well.
Well, Trina, you and I had a conversation about this, and I was putting it pretty much all on the teacher, saying that if the children are not motivated about a topic, it's the teacher's fault. They didn't build up the suspense. They didn't build up the love. I just was being very rude, though, Alicia. So,
which is normal.
I mean, I'm assuming all these other people know you, but wow, you really like hit things hard.
I'm not actually sure if I really believe that, but I do believe, though, that a good teacher can get children excited about just about anything, right? I think, I'm not saying that I do this, but I try to get my students excited about language science. I don't know if I'm successful, but that is my indicator that I'm doing a good job, that they're actually interested and excited about it. And so I do think some of it falls on our shoulders of making them excited about learning about squash and learning about watermelons and things like that. I don't know.
Yes.
So ACSC or ACS ASCD's conference in January is about motivation. That was like their major theme. So I'm very interested to see what comes out of that and how engagement will turn, how that will be after that.
Joyce, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just reading Katie's remark. And this is a bone of contention too. The balanced literacy folks say one of their goals is to make kids love to read. My job is to get the kid to read the words and understand them. I honestly sort of don't care if they enjoy it or not. But I forgot my other train of thought. So sorry.
I think that's beautiful right there. I think that's great. You're right. Your job is to get them to read and to understand what they're reading. And they're not going to be interested in every single topic that's written. No one is. How could you expect it? That's why children focus on things they like they'll read Harry Potter 20 times because they like that. And that's probably okay, right? It's probably okay not to like things like learning about different squashes.
Or you've got kids who only will read expository because they're the curious kids and they don't like narrative. But what I was going to say, I think in today's world, I am shocked at how many kids use YouTube to learn things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a much easier modality just to sit and watch and listen to a video than the time it takes to read. So I think the time it takes to read bothers some kids and some people, adults too.
Joyce, it is so awesome when you see and hear from those parents that their kids are watching YouTube and they have to turn the sound off when they're supposed to be in bed at night and are reading the closed captioning. That's the best. Like, I love that.
Great. That is great.
Love it.
Okay, well then that is going to wrap us up. I'm sorry to cut us off because we could continue this conversation into 2022. Thank you, Doug. Thanks, Trina. Thanks everybody for participating. This was a very engaging conversation as always. So I think we have some topics that we can go over, like motivation next year. That we need to continue that discussion. So thank you all again and hope to see you in 2022 and stay tuned. Thank you.